Michael is the founder of Zero G, who is seeking to build the largest L1 blockchain for AI. We're going to talk about what that means a little bit. Before Zero G, Michael worked as a consultant at Bain and at Bridgewater during the financial crisis and built a startup which went from 300K ARR in its first year to 100 mil in 4 years. After the business went through significant upheaval during COVID, Michael met his technologist co-founders, who were the founders of China's largest and only regulatory compliant L1. And after some back and forth, they decided to build Zero G together. Interested to dive in there. They raised $35 million pre-seed from top investors like Alliance, Animoca, Delphi, Stanford Builders Fund, and a couple of others. And in this conversation, we're going to be focusing on Michael's journey towards Zero G, the vision behind Zero G and its product, and how Michael thinks about building the largest blockchain for AI and what that means. So, Michael, as I said, welcome to the show. Maybe let's start back at the beginning of Zero G. So you met your co-founders, and one of the first things I've read when I was looking into that was they were the founders of China's largest and only regulatory compliant L1 called Conflux. So how did this happen? How did that relationship start? What made you decide that these were the group of people that you wanted to build Zero G with?
Yeah, one day, essentially, my classmate from Stanford, Thomas Yao, reached out to me. And we've done a number of kind of deals together in the blockchain space. We've learned about Bitcoin together. We listened to Mark Andreessen before, and I was a DFJ fellow. We listened to Tim Draper before. Some of our classmates also were talking about Bitcoin at the time. And essentially, we were getting the message, hey, we need to really check this thing out. This was like 2013, 2014 kind of time zone. We bought some Bitcoin together. And then later on, we participated in ICOs, kind of 2016, 17. Thomas's fund was also very early into Ethereum and MetaMask and so on. So we've kind of approached it from an investment standpoint before. And when he reached out to me, he essentially said that 5 years ago, and this was late 2022, 5 years ago, I invested in this company called Conflux. Ming and Fan, two of the co-founders, are some of the best engineers and computer scientists I've ever backed. I'd like you to meet them. They want to start something more global scale. And so that was literally the premise. And we got together, and after 6 months of co-founder dating, I came to the same conclusion. I don't even care what we start. We just have to start something. So it really started with the team. Ming, for example, spent 11 years at Microsoft Research, wrote some of the key research around distributed storage, distributed compute, wrote some of the first AI algorithms for Microsoft Bing as well. Fan was his intern initially, but is a 2-time Olympic gold medalist in informatics, MIT computer science PhD, University of Toronto professor as well. And then they started Conflux together.
Wow, that's an extraordinary set of, I think, achievements. Just a quick one before we get into more of the details. When you talk about co-founder dating, I definitely resonate from a business perspective. Legendary is the person I've been co-founder dating for the longest. Brett has come in a little bit later. What's like when you're starting things out, because I think we've got a lot of entrepreneurial people in the audience as well. When you're starting things out from a business perspective, and I know you've done other businesses before as well, right? You ran a startup called Garten. Your first client was Apple, I believe, from the stuff that I did, and you had like extraordinary success before COVID kind of made things a bit difficult. How are you trying to set up that company with the people around you in order to be successful?
Yeah, for Gartner, it was very interesting because I started it while I was in graduate school, essentially. So I took a class called the Lean Launchpad, and that was taught by Steve Blank. I don't know if you know Steve Blank, but he's kind of the father of the lean startup movement. So if you heard of things like MVP, customer development, get outside of the building, so he's really behind a lot of that. And so he became a mentor to me. And his first thing is basically, there's nothing you can do inside the building. Like nobody's going to figure out, or you're not going to discover customer needs by being inside the building. So get outside the building, talk to actual customers, figure out what they want, and then build a business model that's viable around that. And so that was the mentality that I approached things with. And then the next thing he said is, well, once you figure out a need, then you have to figure out how to scale it. Like, who do you know in a particular company, if it's B2B, is the buyer? Who's the user? Who's the economic decision maker? Who's the saboteur? Who's the influencer? And different company decisions. And so he was very systematic. And so that was the type of mindset I took to building Garten before. And it was quite fun. During the class, we actually started producing revenue because we started seeing that there was something that customers really needed. We started out, so it was a B2B well-being company, and we started out with kind of nutrition needs. And so just with the thing that was the most processed that we take into our bodies generally, which is snacks. And we, within 2 weeks, put up an e-commerce site just to test a bunch of things out. And then about a month into the class, the first order from Apple came in. And it had like a at apple.com email associated with it. I'm like, oh, really? Did Apple just buy something from us? And then I started like LinkedIn stalking this person. And it's like, whoa, this is a real person. And she works with like the VP of design at Apple. This is so cool. And then basically like hand delivered stuff and just asked her a bunch of questions around why did you do it and so on. And then, you know, just took off from there. But that first order is just like, I don't know, mind blowing. It's just so
I'm
much
so
fun.
bullish on that interaction that you just had, right? Like whenever someone does something that is shows that they latched on, right? Whether it's like onto something that you wrote or something that you're doing, something that you're building, and you get immediate feedback from like, what resonated with you? Like because I know from your side, you're like, I'm just trying shit. Like I'm doing something I think is right. I'm not sure what's resonating, and then it hits with someone. And you're like, all right, I need to distill whatever they saw into like a repeatable, scalable thing. And then that's kind of where something can come from. So yeah, you need to have that intuition to seek out that feedback from those initial people to really curate stuff.
And do you remember what she said? What clicked with her to make the order with you guys?
Yeah, what clicked was that essentially we curated an experience where she didn't need to think about it. Because if she goes to other places, she's like, well, I don't know what's healthy. I don't know, what to order. I don't know if my team's going to like it. And the way we approach it is basically like, we're going to take away all the nutrition pieces for you. We will do that. And then we will also do a bunch of the taste testing so that you have a great product in front of you. And so we had maybe 30 different products on the site at the time that they were all, taste tested, which is a really tough job. Just kidding. And it was just a very easy experience. And so that's what she really enjoyed about that experience. And we just kept building on top of that. And then eventually we discovered that it wasn't just kind of the snack pieces, but it was overall nutrition. And then we built this a service around that scaled. And then beyond nutrition, we figured out that it's actually billing is a big issue, because usually people just get a bunch of Excel sheets and they're like, wait, did I really spend $10,000 on gum? This doesn't seem right. Like my entire bill is 50,000, but 10,000 is going to come. Something is not right here. And so we built a SaaS platform for that. And then it just kind of went like this. And we just built more and more and more services. So it really became a one-stop shop experience for all well-being within an office.
That's incredible. One thing that you mentioned for one of maybe the professor said is you can't figure out stuff inside, you got to go outside. I don't know if this is the right comparison, but I think, is there any comparison there with when people are building in like one region and then trying to go outside? Because I know, for example, I was speaking to Legendary before this actually, and we noticed that a lot of the 0G traction, for example, we're maybe in the Western bubble, a lot of it is out in the East. And as you said, your co-founders are the founders of China's largest compliant L1, or that's what they were involved in. How do you see these two hemispheres? To what extent are you trying to be big in both? Do you feel like you need to specialize? How do you attack both angles, or are you just going for all of it in one go?
Yeah, when I was running Garten, the answer was very different versus today. So at Garten, the way we looked at it is we just wanted to know everything about one segment so that we could scale very, very rapidly in that segment. So it was literally very closely defined, 50 to 250 employee companies that are tech focused in the Bay Area.
Got it.
It was super
Very,
narrow.
very specific. Yeah.
Yeah, because I just wanted to know everything about that customer type, because they were eventually paying for our service. And so scaling was much, much easier because they had a certain specific set of needs that we could then meet both on the technology and on the product side. And then it made scaling very, very efficient. Now, with Zero G, it's a little bit different because we have a high performance, essentially layer one. We've got a decentralized compute network. We've got a decentralized storage network. We have a service marketplace, which is kind of an app store, if you will, and then AI alignment nodes on top of that. And so it's a very kind of modular design where different customer sets can figure out what they need for their particular platform. You can use all of it or you can use a part of it. And so the regional focus is not as useful anymore. It's more a kind of psychographic focus, if you will. And so people in the West can use it, people in the East can use it, depending on the different types of use cases that they're looking for. And so it's been less of a geographic focus for us. And so we want to make sure that the key regions are represented from both a trading as well as a usage volume perspective for Zero G. So it's a different approach.
Got it. I understand. I think Brett's going to dive in a bit more on the product side in just a moment. Talking about more kind of global demand, though, one thing that is global is the money, I think, and there's been real demand on the investment side for Zero G. I think I don't know if I have all the details of all of the different raises, but there's the $35 million pre-seed from top investors like Alliance, Animoca, Delphi, and a few others, OKX Ventures as well. It was incredibly successful. I think you did. I think maybe there was a seed round as well, and then a node sale on top of that. Do you want to speak to the strategy of just raising funds and why you thought your attempt to do that was so successful, and where you guys stand with that at the moment?
Yeah, within the Zero G ecosystem, there's a couple organizations at least. One is the Zero Gravity Labs entity, which is the core contributor to the network. That's what I'm the co-founder and CEO of. That entity has raised the pre-seed, which is 35 million, plus another seed of 40 million. And then there's the Zero G Foundation, which is more kind of like the governance and long-term kind of grant and investment entity, if you will. And that entity has conducted a successful note sale of more than 33 million and also has a liquid token commitment of 250 million as well. So each one of the organizations needs to be capitalized differently. And the strategy around it was just to make sure that we have a high performance ecosystem over time.
Got it. Makes sense. And Legendary, I think, is going to dive into some of the tokenomics maybe a little bit later, because you revealed those not so long ago, which is pretty exciting. But Brett, maybe I'll come to you here. Brett's our technical expert, so he's going to get into some more of the product and what maybe the vision is.
Yeah, honestly, Michael did a little bit of the heavy lifting for me right there. But just to summarize, right, because Zero G is not your typical construction, and I think you probably have received some headwinds because of that, right? There's a user education journey that you have to have. So like, I'm just going to do a high level, and then maybe you can bridge the gap on anything that I didn't cover. So, just to summarize in ways that people might understand in the audience, right? It's an L1, it's EVM compatible, but the thing that you talked about earlier, right? It's modular, so it's not. It's like the extreme modularity, right? Because we use modularity in this space where it's like, okay, Ethereum is modular because it's got a bunch of networks, but yours is modular even within your own network, kind of spinning up a bunch of different networks, or even use the word or the term networks and chains separately within your documentation, because it's not necessarily the same thing with how you guys are comprised. One thing that's interesting that I think is worth calling out is how you guys actually leverage Ethereum, right? So your own L1, but to the slashable stake of your validators actually is on Ethereum mainnet, and you use that to inherit some of the actual properties of Ethereum, and then go on to have your various networks, right? Your DA network, your storage, your compute networks, and then all of these other networks, and then the chains within the Zero G network actually burn Zero G to go back to the consensus network, which is where the validators are. Legendary will get into some of that, but two questions for you. One is there anything else outside of that like basic high level architecture that you would like to call out? And then two, how has that user education journey been, because you are so unique in this space when it comes to like your specific construction?
Yeah, the key thing to call out is and this is where the name zero gravity actually derives, or zero G, is this idea that eventually we want infrastructure to be completely invisible to the end user. So on the analogy that I use, if you're using Netflix, for example, today, you don't think about which AWS server to choose, or which encoding algorithm to use for the video, or which kind of payment methodology to use at the end of the day. You're as an end user, you just want to use the application and never have to worry about any outages and so on. So the infrastructure, the idea behind it is, how do we get something to be infinitely scalable? And how do we get something to remove any of the barriers to adoption from Web 2 to come over? Because if you come over from Web 2 and you're like, wait, why did my infrastructure costs rise by 10x? And why am I getting a ton of failed transactions? Then you don't want to switch. And so, or I'm forcing my users to use some type of wallet application that requires a bunch of seed pass phrases, and it's very difficult to use. And so the way we thought about our architecture and design is to remove all of these barriers so that there is no friction. There's a sense of weightlessness. There's a sense of zero gravity, essentially. So that was a bit of the design principle. And so the key thing for infinite scale, for example, is it happens at multiple levels. So the first thing that we did is basically say, okay, we've got a decentralized storage network that's high throughput for AI workloads. Because if we solve the AI workload issue, then we solve all other use cases as well. And so we built it and tested it. It's about 2 gigabytes per second in throughput, which I think is the fastest ever recorded for decentralized storage. So now you can actually use it for hot forms of storage. Then what we said is, okay, we've got this high performance storage network. We can actually then use it as a data availability layer as well. And because the key insight there is, well, what if we segment blob data into a data storage and into a data publishing lane? Because then you're removing the broadcast bottleneck across the entire network. Rather than sending blob data to 120 or 200 validators, however many you have on the network, at the same time, you just store it once, and then you send KZG commitments across the network, like very small bits of data rather than these like really big chunks, essentially. And so then we're like, oh, this creates parallelizability. This creates more throughput because every node you add to the network now adds to the overall data bandwidth. And so what we found is that the theoretical maximum for that is, for 5,000 nodes, we should be able to get to about 50 gigabytes per second in throughput. And that's already enough to start doing some small scale, fully on-chain training, essentially. But we didn't stop there, because if you look at modern data centers, it's not just 50 gigabytes per second, it's hundreds, maybe even a terabyte per second in throughput. So how do we then bridge that gap? Then we said, well, why don't we take a data sharding approach? And what we found there is that the consensus becomes the bottleneck. But what if you just can spin up an arbitrary number of consensus networks at the same time by utilizing, like eigenlayers restaking for economic security or other type of restaking platforms to do that? And then we're like, oh, okay, great. Now we can horizontally scale consensus networks. And then now you have infinite scale at the kind of data throughput layer. So then that became a key input to then scale also the execution layer. So we can, the way we're approaching execution layers, to then say, let's have a n number of kind of arbitrary chains that we can spin up, as long as there's kind of a master chain that keeps all of the different kind of transaction registers available. And so then in effect, you get like infinite TPS, quote unquote, through that. And so then we were able to scale the execution piece as well. And then the final piece is latency. How do you get below 100 milliseconds of latency on a layer 1 network with a 3-hop consensus? It seems impossible, because speed of light, that's the fastest you can get to. But what if you do kind of localized consensus? Kind of what AWS does with like US West, US East, and then just make sure that there's global consensus over time. So we basically just went through, one by one to remove barriers to adoption. So that was the kind of key mindset.
That's interesting. So like that's actually it reminds me of the journey of even Eigenlayer. You referenced them just a moment ago. Like EigenDA was their like key product that they were actually shooting for. They're like, well, what the hell? How do we secure this thing? And then that's actually how they came up with Eigenlayer as a product to then backfill their EigenDA thing. Hearing you go through that thought process of you did one thing, which led to the next thing, which led to the next thing, which led to the next thing. Just that product flow is really interesting. And just context for people in the crowd, like he's calling out gigs per second as like a bandwidth thing, like just, especially in the data availability stuff. That's something I'm familiar with. Just relative numbers in the space. I think Celestia today is doing like 1.5 megabytes per second. EigenDA is probably the fastest DA layer we have today, and there are like 15 megabytes per second, just for relative numbers. So if you're talking gigs per second and tens of gigs to hundreds of gigs per second, it's orders of magnitude bigger as an ambition. So that's actually really impressive. So before we drift too far, I noticed in the documentation you referenced largest chain for AI several times. So first of all, like, what does that mean? And then what is that unlock? Why is it unique for AI specifically? Is it these numbers? Is it something else? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got more than 300 projects building on top of us. So that's kind of, we're trying to build the largest ecosystem around it. We have a very large community, getting close to 3 million wallets on the testnet, 500,000 smart contracts deployed, close to 400 million transactions and so on. So it's been super fun to build and see that traction. And it's really focused on use cases that have some association with AI. I mean, it could be, for example, a game that's using a non-playable character that's calling, let's say, our inference. That can be part of it, all the way to hardcore AI infrastructure like vector DBs building on top of our key value store on a decentralized storage network. So that's the kind of the spectrum, infrastructure, consumer apps, and so on. That's building on our chain. So feeling really proud of being able to build that. And then specifically, AI use cases are quite important to us, because when we got started, ChatGPT was starting to gain a lot of traction, ChatGPT 3 at that point. And we basically fast forwarded 10 years into the future and thought, what does a world look like with a lot of automation in it? And essentially, you can start automating even what I call societal level use cases. So things like logistic systems, like running an airport, or manufacturing systems, or administrative and governance systems. And how comfortable would we feel as a society to have a closed AI or black box AI players manage these systems? For these societal level systems, wouldn't you want to know what went behind the models? Where the data came from, who labeled the data, like how the model was trained, what version of the model am I even getting, how's the agent behaving in production, who even owns the agent? If I create an agent today, do I know that I own it? No, it's in the terms and conditions. It's likely not owned by you. So all of these kind of key questions came up, and we said we have to build an alternative that's owned by kind of people that are participating in the network, that's owned by a community, so that we can make decisions that are more for abundance versus extracting value.
Yeah, you started leaning in towards some like specific products that you were liking as far as like concepts. Do you have any other specific ones that you're excited about? Like what pointed builders are you most excited about? Or what are you hoping is built on your chain? Like what's some of the ambitions for what you have being created?
Yeah, there's quite a bit being built. Some of the ones that we've highlighted recently are, for example, an AI-driven version of a DEX, where they're using AI algorithms to automatically rebalance the LP pools, for example. So that's super cool. And then likely in the future, they'll add some type of like prompting interface as well to make it super simple to do swaps or even more complex type of transactions. That's a product called Zero. There's other things that are coming that are really interesting, like on-chain kind of credit scores that utilize AI, so that you can give kind of larger leverage loans if you've seen a good actor. But personally, the thing that I'm most excited about is utilizing the power of blockchains to actually align AI models as well. And to me, AI alignment doesn't just happen in production. It actually starts with the data itself. Like, where did you get the data from? How do you know this data wasn't poisoned? And the silly example I use there is if I'm wearing a Nike sweatshirt, so nothing against Nike, but let's say Nike approaches OpenAI and says, I'm going to pay you $10 billion so that you train your model in such a way that every time somebody asks something about sports, that Nike comes up. Feasible to happen. And the end user would just keep getting kind of some Nike messaging, and they're like, I guess Nike's like associated with all sports. But that's a bias introduced into the model, and it's a bias you may not even be conscious of. So how do we make sure that we know the types of biases that these underlying models and agents actually have? And so I think there's going to be a lot of fundamental research that we're going to be doing in that area.
Nice. So I'm going to throw out one idea and then just pass it on to Legendary because we're running low on time. So like, I actually heard a conversation around blockchain solving for the difference in inference costs, like the market price of an inference cost, right? Because you have several models, and if I have the same query to 3 different models, one of them may run for 5 minutes and one may run for 1 minute, right? That means the costs are actually different on the back end. So if you can actually spin up a market around the different inference costs and maybe pay upfront with like tokens on how much I'm willing to pay on a specific call, there might be some use case there. But all right, we're running low on time. I'm going to pass over to Legendary so that he can see a little bit what's going on with the forward look of 0G.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Look, you are building a very, very complex ecosystem, and we learned a bit about that in the interview. You're also building that in a very volatile environment. Like, a lot of people go so far to call it a president's market. Everyone is waiting to see, what is Trump saying? What is he posting? What is he saying at the conference? What's the next move there? And the whole market is trading this with extreme volatility. And on the other hand, you have quite a similar picture, I would say, in AI. There's new tools coming out every day. The attention span is a very short one. Every week we get excited about something new, whether that's Bolt, whether that's Manus, and the aficionados move on from tool to tool. So how do you deal with this, like, as a founder, with the volatility in both the market that's very volatile, but also in the attention span? Is that impacting you at all?
The attention span, not so much, because it's kind of this idea of one-upmanship. One day, R1 comes out from DeepSeek, another day Qwen comes out, and then attention shifts, as you mentioned, to Manus and so on. The key thing from our perspective is just to make sure that we support the latest frontier models that are open source. So as long as we do that through our inference and soon to be released fine-tuning capabilities on our network, then it's not as big of a deal, because what we're trying to fundamentally do is not build everything ourselves. We're not trying to rebuild an open AI, which ironically, again, is closed AI, but we are creating a one-stop shop experience utilizing all the best that Web3 and AI has to offer, like all the different types of builders in this space we want to bring together so that it is as easy of an user experience as doing a bunch of API calls in OpenAI. That's fundamentally our goal. So as long as we have a complete pulse on the market, what's happening, where it's moving, we support the best open source and Web3 AI projects, it's not too big of a challenge for us to kind of keep focusing on our long-term vision. As far as the volatility in the Web3 market, that's something we're not quite as worried about, because it's a very long-term journey to make AI a public good, which is our mission. That's not going to happen in one market cycle, for example. So we really have a build for the long-term type of perspective, and so not too shaken by short-term volatility. It impacts things more like a token generation event, maybe, but in the large scheme of things, from a pure technology and research-based kind of process and deliverables, it's like, for example, we can't solve decentralized training, in a couple months. Like, that's a research problem. That's a very long-term problem. And if we make good headwinds this year, I'd be very happy on that. So not too worried about that either.
Yeah, you mentioned this long-term perspective, and you mentioned this like ultimate vision of the Netflix state, right? You're using an app, you're using an ecosystem, you don't really care, at least 90% of the users don't, about what's going on in the background. But you also mentioned you're building so many individual building blocks. There's the AI Launchpad, which we had talked about, the AI DEX, the on-chain credit scores. All of those things are happening. All of them are interesting, and we love to nerd about them in our bubble. So how long do you think will this transition or this journey take until we, quote unquote, like, stop getting excited about the individual building blocks and we will transition into this Netflix state of just using a fully integrated, holistic AI ecosystem? Is it years? Is it a decade? Is it longer than a decade? What would your best guess be?
My expectation is a couple of years, I would say, because I would consider that 2 years as a catch-up phase. As I kind of hinted at, that fully on-chain training for LLMs just not possible today. Like state of the art is about 10 billion parameter type of models. I think Prime Intellect released something where they trained between 2 data centers this 10 billion parameter model, fully decentralized. But what about a 400 billion parameter model? And by the time 2 years is over, we're likely at a trillion parameter model or more at this point. So how do we make sure that we have the infrastructure to support this kind of large-scale, state-of-the-art training, for example? Or even on the inference side, making sure that we can have very large-scale models that we can actually then run in a fully decentralized, verifiable, permissionless way. Yeah, so 2 years of catch-up, and I think at that point we should have an environment where the end user doesn't have to worry too much about the infrastructure, and builders that are working with us can again use different components. So for example, if you're building a very large scale and high throughput L2, and you just want to use, let's say, our data availability layer plus maybe some of our inference and fine tuning for the agents that are working on there, totally fine. We want to support all of these use cases.
I just got a quick one there, Michael. You mentioned all types of different builders who are working with you. Chains have taken different approaches when it comes to builders and to what extent people decide to support versus like maybe some help with marketing, or maybe just taking a whole bunch of builders and saying like these are maybe more officially sanctioned builders or officially approved. And we've seen a kind of varying success with both approaches. I don't think there's one specific approach that people know to be correct yet. How do you think about working with the builders and the apps that are building on top of you? What's your approach there?
We have 2 primary modalities. So we overall have a 88.8 million ecosystem program. And as part of that, we have 2 modalities right now. One is what we call the Guild on Zero G campaign, which is less the kind of lower touch, which somebody essentially applies through a form. They tell us, here's the application or the infrastructure that we want to build. And then we review it and then basically say, like, this sounds great. Let's give you some type of investment to have you off and running. And if you have any technical integration questions, let us know and we can provide some support. So more low touch, builder knows what they want to build. And then there's, on the other hand, the accelerator, which is 8 to 10 highly curated companies that want a lot of support from us on all aspects: go-to-market, fundraising, development, product market fit type of questions. And so that's a much, much higher touch aspect from us, where we bring our entire team from Zero G, as well as our partners like One Piece Labs and Moonhill Capital, to support these builders so that we can make them as successful as possible. In the first cohort, we had a number of companies that went quite far already. The one that was the furthest along was Carve, and they actually launched on centralized exchanges like Upbit and Bybit and so on. And when the market was still not trading sideways, they were valued at above $1 billion. So very proud of the team for being able to accomplish that. And we definitely want to support other builders on their path, but with a much more kind of high touch experience.
That's interesting. So you're kind of taking a bit of a hybrid approach there.
Yeah.
Interesting to note. Legendary, do you want to get into maybe some of the tokenomics and the token stuff? Where do you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I love talking about the long-term vision, the long-term focus, but as you said, the market side of things, if it impacts anything, then it's more the tokenomics and TGE considerations. And since you've recently did release, or the Zero G Foundation did release the tokenomics, I want to touch on some parts of that. It seems there's been a bit of a discussion on the timeline going on after this preliminary token distribution has been revised a bit, and the timeline has been focusing on the community bucket side of things. So just maybe quickly taking a step back for our audience to break down the tokenomics a bit more before I get into the question. There's a significant ecosystem growth allocation of 28%, almost half of that being unlocked to TGE. There's an AI alignment node bucket of 15%, with a third of that being unlocked to TGE. And then there's the revised 13% of the total allocation, which are being reserved for the community rewards, 20% of that being available at TGE, which is 2.6% then of the net supply. And the rest will then be distributed in seasons over 48 months. And I wanted to give you a chance to speak to the tokenomics and specifically to the thinking and the reasoning that went into those 3 different community allocation buckets.
Fundamentally, our thinking was that essentially community should deserve, first of all, the largest allocation. And so that's why you're seeing the community bucket being 56% versus the team advisors, contributors, kind of backers bucket at 44%. And oftentimes with major L1s, you actually end up seeing that the other bucket is significantly larger because maybe the investors alone have 35% and then the team is like 20% and so on. But for us, we were able to design it in such a way that there was a kind of community first mentality from that. So that was one design principle. And we were very cautious around how we fundraised as well from a lab entity standpoint. We wanted to make sure we had a highly distributed cap table so that no investor owns, for example, if it's a 20% allocation of one investor owns 10%, then all of a sudden you're starting to see a little bit more of a centralization on the cap table. So that was something that we didn't want as part of that. So then the next design principle was, one of the things we've observed is that there's a lot of, so to speak, farming where, testnet is really hot. People do all types of things to see if they can, farm some type of airdrop allocation. But for us, what was essential is more that kind of long-term support, because our perspective is long-term. We want to build a platform that solves for kind of major societal issues like aligning AI models. And so we took a long-term approach to that. And so the way we designed it is to say, okay, how do we create long-term holders that care about the network fundamentally? And so our decentralization mechanism primarily was the AI alignment node sale from that perspective, because we just fundamentally believe if you're an investor, if you're a holder of this long-term token, that you're going to create or make actions or support with a long-term perspective as well. So that's why you see a very large allocation for that, 15% for that kind of long-term perspective. And then the community rewards is more based around specific actions that different end users can take, whether they contribute in social campaigns or other type of kind of DApp campaigns and testnet campaigns and so on, where we want to make sure that they're also valued and rewarded for their contributions. But really the biggest bucket there from an unlock perspective was the alignment node holders because of that long-term perspective. Then the ecosystem growth perspective is used for things like the ecosystem program that I mentioned, the 88.8 million, to support initiatives like that long-term so that we can attract and work with the best builders in the AI meets Web3 space long-term.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to have this long-term incentive alignment. Look, we only have a couple of minutes left in the interview, but I want to have a quick follow-up question on the tokenomics that is on the community reward side of things. You said it, you're going to keep some for campaigns that will be activated in the future. It's the 48 months period that we'll see a seasonal distribution. Is there anything you can share on that? Will it mostly be campaigns? Will it follow, because it's a seasonally distributed, will it follow sort of a season logic? What can we expect from that to the extent that you can comment on that?
Yeah, we haven't released specific details around that. And as we've kind of seen new things start popping up, for example, an NFT collection called One Gravity was built. So that was super fun. So we want to make sure that as these things kind of arise, that we have ways of kind of rewarding contributors to that. And the seasonal aspect, again, is the idea of making this kind of a long-term bet for people. So it's not just like, hey, I'm going to buy an NFT, I get the reward, and then, okay, I'm done. I'm going to just sell the NFT. But there should actually be useful ecosystem things that are unlocked by having that particular NFT. So that was the design principle around it. And the seasons, I think, we'll figure out over time. one extent, one of the things I've learned in graduate school is if you design something with very clear timelines versus having something that's more what's the word that I'm using for not off the cuff, but that happens on a non kind of aligned timeline, then there is a sense of excitement around it as well. So there's a kind of momentary excited happiness. So we need to make sure there's a long-term happiness and a kind of a momentary excited happiness. And so that was the design principle there too.
Yeah, I completely resonate with that. It's like even for any company, right? Like even for ourselves, we have like yearly, annual goals, but then we break things down into quarters, and then things change. Things change from quarter to quarter, especially when you're in such a volatile industry. And this end of this quarter has been completely different to maybe the end of the previous quarter. So big changes, and I appreciate that kind of requirement for some flexibility as you progress. But as Legendary said, we're kind of drawing to a conclusion here. Michael, just wanted to give you the chance. I think we've had a really interesting conversation. We've kind of touched on product, touched on history, touched on the vision, the funding, the objectives that you guys really want to achieve. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that maybe we've missed? Anything you'd like to call out, spotlight, just before we close out here?
No, just reiterating this idea that we have a very long-term focus around making AI a public good. And the type of world that we see is, well, with any new technology, you can have kind of two dimensions. One is abundance, the other is weaponizing that technology. And so we very much want to be on the abundance side so that we can create a world where we potentially, as some of my professors say, we might not have to work for a living anymore, where we can truly choose, pursue our passions, and be kind of our holistic self, our best selves. And so, what does a world like that look like? And that's something that we're really excited about. And so any of the contributors to our network and users and so on, I want them to have a very long-term perspective so that we can build this type of mission, this type of vision together in the space. And so we're really excited about kind of building for the long term.
Sounds very exciting. We joke, well, I don't think we joke often. We're being quite serious when we say one of the reasons or one of the byproducts of creating so much content is that we hope we have this humongous bank of content so that we can train the AI and create different versions of ourselves. So we don't have to necessarily be running the show every single day. Our very intelligent AI counterparts will be able to take over. So if you have any builders on your chain that are able to do that, we'd be delighted to hear.
Yeah, let's chat more about that. There's some approaches.